about very serious matters, shall we? Because do you remember, I think was it last week or so when we spoke about this off the back of the NATO boss's comments? Well, now a UK Army boss is basically General Sir Patrick Sanders. He's come out now today in a speech and said that us Brits, we basically need to get ourselves into the war mindset, the war mentality. This is in the eventuality, the potential eventuality of a war with Russia. We know, don't we, that, you know, the army has been depleted.
Yeah.
But I mean, I am a little bit uncomfortable, and me and some of my viewers depart on my opinions when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I feel a little bit worried. I feel like we're too gung-ho. We seem to be hurtling into World War III, seemingly quite happy to be doing so, and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable.
Well, the best way to ensure peace is to have a strong defence, and having a properly equipped and properly sized military doesn't mean that you're bellicose, doesn't mean that you want to go into conflict. It may simply mean that if you want peace, you must prepare for war. And for me, I actually don't think this is a genuine call for mass conscription. I think it is a, no pun intended, warning shot from senior military personnel that we are under-resourcing our military yet again. It's very interesting, and we've been doing this as a country for a long, long time. We came very close before the Falklands conflict to scrapping a number of the warships that were then deployed in the Falklands conflict. Literally a matter of months. And if the junta in Argentina hadn't been in such a rush to invade, they might have been much better placed a mere few months afterwards. Here it's even worse because our military is getting smaller and smaller. And if we were, what he means is, if we were in a serious conflict right now, our military is too small. And I think it's a very fair point for somebody to make.
Would you stand and fight for your country?
I would. I mean, I dare say I wouldn't be very helpful. I'm not macho, but I am willing. I don't know how useful I would be, but I would absolutely serve and fight and die for my country.
Would you, at home? I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen we have about 27,000 fewer regular troops in the army now than in 2010. We've gone from about 102,000 to 75,000. If the Conservatives had kept up with a 2.5% GDP commitment to defence spending, there'd be an extra £90 billion put into defence since 2010. And you hear Conservatives, including the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, saying that the army has been hollowed out and underfunded by his own government in which he served as Defence Secretary. The reality is, if we are serious about the commitments that we make internationally, we have to be able to put our money where our mouth is. If we really believe in NATO, and we are one of the core founders of NATO, founded under the Attlee government after the war, then we have to be able to we can't just keep looking to the Americans all the time to sort of underwrite the international system. Especially, I think, as the situation within America becomes more uncertain about its willingness to always step up. So we have to play our part, and I'm afraid that the government has neglected this area, and that's why we find comments that Sir Patrick's making at the moment.
Tom, who is an army veteran, says that I suspect a large number of the current younger generation would not be prepared to go for war for this country because they're too busy being offended, protesting or trying to figure out what gender they are. We're going to come on to, before the end of the programme, why we all are so offended at the moment. But Steve says, I am an English, white, straight male, aged 47, and I'm at the back of the queue for absolutely everything in our society. He says, I doubt we would go to war with Russia, but if we did, he says, I'd fight for my country, and I doubt I'd be at the back of the queue then.
It's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy go away, but it's Hello Mr. Atkins when the band begins to play.
Yeah, I mean, we did actually run a poll on this, and we were asking you guys at home whether or not you would go and fight for your country. 63.1% of you said no, while 36.9% of you said yes, you would. And I have to say that doesn't actually surprise me. I also have to say as well that the Ministry of Defence released a statement in response to these conversations and suggestions, saying the British military has a proud tradition of being a voluntary force, and there is absolutely no suggestion of a return to conscription.
Hang on. I mean, it's got a proud tradition except for recent world wars. I mean, that's true up to a point, Lord Cropper.
Yeah, but you see, does that surprise you, that poll that we've run, that 63% of people basically said that they would not stand and fight?
It's very interesting, and no offence to you, and I appreciate it's the Channel's poll. You were pouring scorn on the notion of national weighted polling. I put very little weight, I'm afraid, on a Twitter poll.
So, but you see, I do think, because a lot of people would actually say that if things were perhaps different, a lot of people don't feel looked after by this country.
Sure.
A lot of people feel that they're quite almost just thrown on a little bit of a scrap heap in this country. And if that's how you feel and you're quite demoralised, then when someone turns around and goes, right, I know we've kind of slighted you, I know we've let you down, and I know we've treated you pretty damn badly, but this is your country after all, so come on and step forward and fight. I just think there might be quite a rude awakening for how many people would be prepared to do that.
And that's how civilisations fall and fail. Ultimately, we will decide as a country whether our future is worth living and defending or if it's not. And we are in the course of deciding that, perhaps more slowly than these deadlines you're talking about might suggest. But I hope in the end we decide that it is worth defending. And if you do think that, then perhaps fighting for it's going to be required.
I think people have to have a sense of what the alternative is. Again, if we pull back, if the United States pulls back, then who fills that space? We're in a world now where China is being much more internationally proactive, aggressive. And people might say, OK, well, things that are happening in Taiwan or Ukraine or the Red Sea feel far away. But these things have an immediate impact on us, actually, in terms of disrupting the economic order in which our living standards depend, but also has a longer-term impact, because if we continue to allow, in effect, appease this kind of new mode of territorial aggrandizement, they don't stop. Yes. And they will come closer and closer to interests that people in this country do feel more about. And that's why it's important to nip it in the bud at an earlier stage, so it doesn't escalate into the kind of conflicts that become sucking everyone in like a world war or global conflict.
I agree with that. And Putin has only been encouraged by the weak response from many Western countries. These people in the end only understand one thing. And whilst your position, Michelle, might be entirely understandable vis-à-vis people's attitude towards their own domestic government and the travails in their own life, you cannot in the end say that life would be better under the Putins of this world rather than democratic government in Westminster. And if these are hard choices in the end. Choose. What
do you think would happen to the international landscape if Donald Trump got elected?
So it's interesting. Trump, in some ways, is far more isolationist than either his predecessor or successor. And Joe Biden is, in a lot of ways, a throwback to a democratic era, not just pre-Trump, but mid-20th century and prior to that, much more engaged in the world and much more outward going. I'm not a fan of the Biden presidency, but that is to their credit. The flip side of the conversation is that Trump's period in office was marked by a remarkable stability and peace in international affairs. People may dislike him for all manner of things he did in governing the United States, but in terms of international conflict, it was the 1 4-year period in which Putin didn't invade somebody since the millennium.
Well, he said, didn't he, or he keeps saying, that he would sort out the Ukraine-Russia conflict in a day, I think is his time frame.
Guff.
Well, there was, actually, I think in instinct, oddly enough, Obama and Trump shared quite a lot in common in terms of feeling that the United States had overstretched itself, particularly under the George W. Bush administration. And both of them spoke about this in different ways, but both of them kind of wanted the US to pull back. But the difference with Trump was that there is this sense of uncertainty about him that ultimately, this is called the madman theory of international relations, that other actors, including Putin, were never really sure if he'd be willing to use, as Trump said, the N-word, the nuclear button. And even if that seemed a very, very remote possibility, a more than 0% chance might have restrained Putin for that particular period of time. It's not a stable way of conducting international relations, but in that period, it did deliver a certain degree of ironically, stability.
It's deep. I mean, it's deeply erratic. You're right. But when you let's think of something outside the immediate zones. The Trump approach to North Korea was impossible to predict. You know, I hate you, you ridiculous little rocket man. I'm coming to visit you. We'll fix this all in person. The visit's cancelled. You're terrible. I'm coming. Let's skip across the peace line. I mean, your head spun with the positions. But there they were, since the first time since the Korean War, a leader of a Western power walking peacefully into North Korea and back again. I mean, people, you know, of both sides in politics had failed to move that North Korean relationship, and Trump did.
Well, speaking of American and UK relations, the American embassy in London, they've had to apologise because an American academic has basically said you should put salt in your cup of tea. I've never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life, but it's good to see that they had quite a nice sense of humour, because the US Embassy has basically said we'll continue to make our tea in the proper way by microwaving it. Ugh, you don't microwave your tea, surely?
I certainly don't. But there's a little bit of a historical parallel here. Last month was the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, when the American rebels threw perfectly good boxes of tea into the Charles River in Boston Harbor. And that gives you a sense of the contempt that Americans have for that lovely drink.
Well, I've never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life. Salt in your tea and microwaving it. Next, you'll be telling me that you use one tea bag per cup. You don't do that, do you?
Yes, and one for the pot.
Oh, no. I use one tea bag per 2 cups. I'm just way too tight.
Your tea is too weak.
It's not. Look at it. Well, actually, I was just about to say, look at it, but I didn't make this one. I can't claim to have made my cup of tea. But anyway, salt in your tea, microwaving your tea, is that for you or not? After